Hello? There we go. So good evening. It has just been brought to my attention that there was a misprint about the time that we were starting tonight, and so some of you have been sitting here quite a while, and I apologize for that inconvenience, but I am very excited to be able to present to you who we will be listening to this evening. It's been quite a fun couple of days. Yesterday we had the opportunity to present at the university. Dr. Grandin was able to shine in her forte, which is animal behavior in the animal industry. And when I was talking to her about coming, she said, I have one requirement. I want to be able to talk to the university or to groups about cattle. Why not? Right on. And it was fun. There was quite an audience. I think it was 1,350 people that were there, so it was amazing. And we brought her up with our first annual Autism Society of Alaska State Conference. And this morning we started with that, and we were sold out there as well. So Fairbanks has been very generous in supporting Dr. Grandin in her trip here to Alaska. So a couple of housekeeping pieces. We request that you not use flash photography while Dr. Grandin is presenting. It's kind of distracting. Also, if you will silence your cell phones, this is another distractor for us. Oh, can we scoot in? If there's a seat next to you, scooch on in. We have more people coming in, and it's going to be a full house tonight. So if you'll visit our website, www.asagoldenheart.org, you'll be able to see recorded presentations. The university presentation on animal behavior was recorded, and in a couple of days it will be available on our website. The presentation this evening is also recorded, and it will be available on our website in a couple of days as well. On our website, like us on Facebook, you'll find all of the lovely, wonderful, fantastic sponsors who have helped make this possible, that we could bring Dr. Grandin to Alaska and then provide 2 free presentations. That's pretty exciting stuff. And a little plug of future events for the Autism Society of Alaska. This will be our 8th annual Walk Run for Autism, May 14th. Please come and join us, and the information is on our website as well. So I've talked enough. Without any further ado, Temple Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. Facilities that she has designed for handling livestock are used by many companies around the world. She has also been instrumental in implementing animal welfare auditing programs that are used by McDonald's, Wendy's, Whole Foods, and other corporations. Temple has appeared on numerous TV shows, such as 2020, Larry King Live, and Prime Time. Her books include Thinking in Pictures, Livestock Handling and Transport, and the Autistic Brain. Her Animals and Translations has been on the New York Times bestseller list. So without any delay, let's welcome Dr. Grandin.
Great to be here. A lot of things to talk about tonight. This is going to be kind of a talk where I'm going to combine some autism with some business stuff, a little bit of cattle stuff too. I think I'll just start out. Some people weren't at my other talks. I was a little kid. I had severe speech delay. I was very lucky to get into very good early educational intervention. I can't emphasize enough the importance of that. Today I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. In fact, I've been there for 26 years. And your university right here works with the Colorado State University Veterinary School. I went over there yesterday. It was wonderful to do the first 2 years in the veterinary education here, and then they finish out at CSU, at my school. So that was really wonderful to see that. Okay. Oh, now I hope the slide changer is going to work. Okay. What I want to get you thinking about is different ways that people think. You get kids labeled with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, learning problems of various types. Often these kids are good at one kind of skill and bad at something else. And too often education works on the disability and doesn't do enough to work on building up the thing that the kid's good at. Now I think in pictures. And when I was a lot younger, in my 20s, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I didn't know that my thinking was different. Now when you understand different people think differently, it can help them to work together. I don't know if you're changing it up there or I have to just tell you to change it. What are some of the common conflicts out there in business? Well, techies can't stand the suits. And I think some of this is different kinds of minds. And when you understand people have different kinds of minds, it's really going to help you. The people in the field versus the academics. Thing I have observed for years in the cattle industry and other industries with animals is often the guy that's kind of the quirky guy, the dyslexic guy, maybe the guy who didn't do well in school is really good with animals, and also really good at things like welding or fixing cars. And you have all kinds of great outdoor activities here. But some of these kids that are different are not going to get interested in these things if they're not exposed. I got exposed to dog sledding today. I did the 4-mile trip. It was really fun. Now, in science, you've got just observation versus quantified data. Is observation part of science? I say, yes, it is. And the artists have always hated the accountants. That's gone on forever. And then in my field, the people who study animals in their natural environment are going to have to, this doesn't work. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, some of these conflicts range from silly, like do I have to wear a tie? Well, we're talking about clothing. There's a scene in the HBO movie, and we had to ration books because they didn't realize how many people are going to be here, but we do have a few movies left that I'll sign afterwards. And there's a scene in the movie where my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink, use it." And his secretaries took me shopping. Being eccentric's okay, but being a slob with everything dirty and rumpled looking, that's not okay. I have been to NASA, I've been to Jet Propulsion Lab, and there's a guy at the Jet Propulsion Lab that has a mohawk with red tints in it. And it looks really cool. You can work for NASA and you can be different. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, observation is part of real science. What do you think the Hubble Space Telescope is? I used to fight with my professor when I was getting my PhD. He didn't think observation was part of real science. What do you think the study of gravitational waves? We're proving Einstein right. That's observation, doesn't have a control. In fact, Einstein would probably be labeled with autism today. You see, a little bit of autism gives you creativity, gives you a programmer. You get too much of it, you get a very severe kid that maybe can't dress themselves. It is a continuum of traits. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I figured out that my thinking was different when I started interviewing people about how they think. Now, when I was younger, I used to think maybe some of you didn't think the same way I did was stupid. It wasn't stupid. It was thinking differently. But the different kinds of minds can complement each other. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is one of my super important slides. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. Okay, now I'm thinking about the dog sleds. I'm seeing it. That comes back as pictures. And I couldn't do algebra. Now, right now, our educational system is on an algebra fad. And I'm very, very concerned that it's going to block out a lot of smart, creative people. Right now, down in the States, I should say I am in the States, in the lower 48, I got to say it right, there's a huge shortage of diesel and auto mechanics. I went to Newark, New Jersey, and I went to community college there, and a girl wasn't allowed to take biology because she hadn't passed algebra. That is garbage. And the only reason I managed to get through college, because in '67, finite math was the fad. And with tutoring, I was able to do the finite math. If the kid can't do algebra, let's go straight to geometry. And if you want to find the really good geometry stuff online, use the image function on Google, type in geometry, get great, fabulous visual web pages. Trigonometry on Google Images. It gives you great web pages. Even calculus is 20% visual. And I type in algebra, nah, just get pretty fonts. That's all it will give me. Then another kind of mind is the engineering programming mind. You know, like the people that bring you Google, engineers, they think in patterns. Not in pictures, but in patterns. That's how they think. And these kids sometimes have trouble with reading. And then you got the verbal facts mind. He knows everything about his favorite things. Now I want to talk about the importance of learning job skills. I'm seeing too many smart kids labeled with mild autism, dyslexia, ADHD, or some other label, and they're not learning how to work outside the home. Now, we're right here in a church. 10 years old is a really good time to get a church usher job. Teach these kids how to shake hands with people. When I was about 7 or 8, Mother had me be party hostess at her parties. Middle school kids, well, they can help set the chairs up. It's a job, and they got to do it on a schedule outside the home. They got to learn how to do tasks outside the home. When I was 13, Mother got me a sewing job. She just set it up in the neighborhood with a freelance seamstress. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. Took care of a horse barn. Yes, and this dog yard's around here that need to be cleaned up. Yeah, you do have to start out doing the not fun stuff first. And then you get to do the fun stuff. I was talking to the people out there with the dog sleds, and they've been working with some at-risk youth. And it's been really, really good getting these kids caring about animals. And then I went to my aunt's ranch. Luck brought the ranch into the family. My mother got remarried, brought the ranch into the family, and that's how I got interested in the beef industry. I had to be exposed to it. Kids get interested in stuff they get exposed to. So let's start snowmobile repairs at around age 12. Then, all through college, I was doing internships. One was at a research lab where I had to rent a house. I was painting signs at the Arizona State Fair Carnival. And my very first sign painting job, where I got paid, was for a beauty shop. Now, I had to make a sign that they would want. You've got to learn how to do work that employers want. And then some people are an auditory thinker. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, now what are some of the characteristics of visual thinking? It's bottom up. Word thinking's top down. There's a tendency when you think in words to overgeneralize. People overgeneralize about animal behavior. They'll ask me things like, what do I do about crazy dogs? Well, I don't know. Are they crazy happy, crazy vicious? I don't know. Also, concepts are learned with specific examples. Okay, so my concept of what a dog is based on lots of different specific examples. Visual thinkers notice details. It's sensory-based, it's not word-based. And being a visual thinker helped me work with animals because they don't think in words. What is it seeing, smelling, hearing? It's a sensory-based world. Also, visual thinking is associative. If you give me a key word, then I can just start associating. So maybe I'm thinking about, I don't know, why don't you give me a key word and I'll show you how associative thinking works. Give me a key word. Something interesting, not house or car. Pickles. Pickles? Okay. I'm seeing the McDonald's pickle in the middle of the pickles. I'm also seeing this really disgusting pickle factory that I saw from a train one time. I'm seeing some big glass jars of pickles. And then there's a song that says, I don't want a motorcycle. Sometimes I get a musical association. So now I'm getting into 60s rock and roll. So how to get from pickles to rock and roll. You see, it's associative. It has a logic to it. Yes, and I think somebody had something like pickle and peanut butter jelly sandwiches, and I'm going, ugh, that's just terrible. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, in the very first work that I did with cattle, I got down in the chutes to see what cattle were seeing. Okay, I can see a car through the fence. Maybe there's a reflection on that car. That's going to make the animals balk. Nobody thought to look at what were cattle seeing. There's a hose on the ground. They stop at the hose. You got to give the leader a chance to stop, put its head down, and take a look. Maybe there's a chain hanging down. Reflections on water can make them stop. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's see how good you are at observation. Animals see details. Got a nice non-slip floor there. Non-slip flooring is really important. How many people saw that animal looking at the sunbeam? Oh, we're doing sort of all right. But that's an example of sensory-based thinking. Let's go on to the next slide. Look at how the zebra and the horse have an ear on each other. What are they doing with their ears? The other ear is on me because I'm taking the picture. And when I work with students, I say, I want you to be more observant. What is the animal looking at? What is it seeing? What is it listening? What is it attending to? Let's go to the next slide. I always get asked, do they know they're going to get slaughtered? And don't worry, I'm not going to show you any slaughter pictures. But if you do want to see how some of the things I've designed work, there's a piece of equipment called the center track restrainer system I developed for large meatpacking plants. You can go to Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin, and you can see how it works. So to figure out whether or not they knew they were going to get slaughtered, I went down to the slaughter plant, Swifts, this was back in the 70s. Then I went to the feed yard and I watched them get vaccinated. And they behaved the same way in both places. If they knew they were going to get slaughtered, they should be a whole lot wilder at the slaughter plant. And that just wasn't the case. So, okay, I have my students look at this picture. What are some things that you might fix here? And most will notice the chain hanging down, but they don't notice the three guys standing right where they should not be standing. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, since cattle is a visual thinker, a man on a horse and a man on the ground is viewed as two totally different things. So if the cattle have only been handled by a man on a horse, and that's very common in the western lower 48, they've learned that the man on the horse is safe. And the first time they see a man on the ground, it looks totally different and they run away and get scared. It's really important to train them to both the man on the horse and the man on the ground. You see, they are visually specific. For example, if you train a horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella opening, that doesn't transfer to an orange tarp flapping around. Think about it. An umbrella and a tarp look very different. Animals' thinking is specific because it's sensory-based. Let's go to the next slide. There's one of my systems, and one of the reasons why it goes around in a half circle is because the animals have a natural tendency to go back to where they came from. I have spent 20 years of my life, I would sell a project, design it, do the drawings for it, supervise its construction, yes, and live in crappy hotels with the construction crews. Now construction crews get to stay at Holiday Inn Expresses, but not when I was doing this. Some of the best times I ever had. Great guys, really quirky, probably quite a few learning problems, and really smart. And too many of those guys today are playing video games on Social Security rather than getting those good millwright jobs. In fact, big companies like Cargill and Tyson are frantic right now looking for industrial mechanics. They're putting billboards up on the side of the highway for these jobs. I've been in places where there's a whole shop full of hippies, and they're retiring now. But I know the head engineer was on the spectrum. Now, when you're a weird geek, you got to learn to sell your work rather than yourself. So I'd show them pictures of projects to people, drawings, articles I'd written, make a portfolio of your work. Now today you can put that stuff up on LinkedIn. There's all kinds of things online to show off your work. Yeah, but don't put rubbish up there. Just don't. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a really simple little cattle handling facility. Takes advantage of the animal's tendency to go back to where they come from. Let's go on. Oh, by the way, on the different kinds of mines, you might wonder, is that evidence-based? Yes. in my book, The Autistic Brain, Helping Different Kinds of Minds to Succeed. All the evidence-based is there. Now, they've run out of it at the book counter. I can sign a paper for you. They can order it, or you can pick it up on Amazon or some other site. But that gives the evidence-based for the different kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so how does associative thinking work? Say shoes. Okay, next slide. Then I get to see these awful shoes that I had when I was a kid that I hated. And I had to sit through church even though I thought it was boring. You know, sometimes you got to do stuff you don't want to do because other people want to do it. Now, I notice you got a lot of sound equipment here. There are going to be some kids that are going to have a hard time tolerating loud sound. So then maybe they go out in the foyer then, during some of the loud music. Not going is not an option. Okay, next slide. Much better childhood memories of these sneakers, and I'm happy to see that they're back in fashion now. They like our stuff. Let's go on to the next slide. Now more good childhood memories, back in fashion. Let's go to the next slide. That's the shoe I wear today. And then how do I get from this Ariat boot to a mud puddle, which I show on the next slide? Well, because I stepped in a mud puddle. I've also stepped in like dog do too. Now, I don't think I'm going to show you that. But you see, it's associative. Okay, now I'm seeing myself in the tailgate of the SUV getting Carhartts on, and I really appreciate the person that let me wear their Carhartts because that made the dog sled fun. Now, I know that it's not that cold, but when you just, it does get cold. And the Carhartts made it that was really fun, dressing up like an Alaskan. Okay, go on to the next slide. Okay, here's evidence for the different kinds of minds, some of the references. We'll go on to the next slide. Now, there's one of my drawings. That is how I sold my work. I showed off my drawings. I'd show pictures of jobs. I had a very nice brochure. Nope, I never mentioned autism. I just showed off the work. You got to sell your work. And you can be eccentric, but you can't be a slob. And I talked to a young man tonight, and I might have been a little harsh about, his clothes were all rumpled up. I had bosses that were harsh with me about that, and I thank them now. And that scene in the movie where the secretaries took me shopping, that actually happened. And at the time, I was really angry, but I thank them. Thank you, Linda Carter. Thank you, Emil. You were the people that did this. That really helped me. And when these kids make social mistakes at work, someone's just got to pull them aside and explain it to them. On my very first job at the Swift plant, I criticized some welding, and I said it looked like a pigeon doo-dooed on it. That's not the way to do it. So the plant engineer pulled me into his office and explained to me that I had to apologize for saying that. And I had to go and apologize to Whitey the welder. Now, I didn't tell him the welding was wonderful, but I apologized for the rude talk. But he didn't hint with me. He just pulled me in and told me exactly quietly. He didn't scream at me. Told me really quietly what I had done wrong. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a brain scan that shows I got a big visual thinking circuit. Then the next slide shows another brain scan that just shows another slice of a big visual thinking circuit. So I'm the art kind of mind. Kids get to be around third grade or so. You'll see the mathematicians, maybe the art kind of mind. Let's build on the strength. Drawing was always encouraged, and I was encouraged to do lots of different kinds of drawing. Let's go to the next slide. Now that's a circuit for speak what you see. It's a bundle of axons, of nerve fibers. The next slide shows my bundle for speak what you see. On the next slide. Hopefully we get that there. And you can see I've got a whole lot of extra bushes on it. Now, at what point is that abnormal? If you went and scanned 100 people, you scanned a bunch of artists, you're probably going to find some of this. It's a continuous trait. Now, obviously, if a kid doesn't talk when he's young, yeah, something's abnormal there. But then you got the kids that are just quirky and nerdy with no speech delay. Let's go on to the next slide. But I paid a price for those extra fibers that give me a visual search engine. I had delayed speech. I had trouble getting it out. I couldn't get the speech out. And I was very lucky to get very good speech therapist when I was 2.5. Let's go to the next slide. Well, that blue part on there, it's full of water. And you can see on my scan, the left parietal area is wrecked. Destroyed algebra department. This brings up the whole area problem of working memory. Do not load working memory. A lot of kids that have learning issues, they got tons of long-term memory, tons and tons and tons of hard drive space, tons and tons of it, but working memory is bad. So long strings of verbal information does not work. Let them write it down. If they have to do a task that has a sequence of things, write it down, bullet points, pilots, checklist, write it down. And that's what, in engineering, that's called a workaround. You just do it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in 1968, Bill Gates and I had access to this computer, the IBM teletype machine. I wanted to learn programming, I just couldn't do it. He learned programming. Now, we get into all the arguments about abilities, innate versus learned. Where I think innate ability is most important is if there's an extreme ability or an extreme disability. And then there's a whole lot of plasticity in the middle. But innate, where there's a lot of ability, something like art or math, or maybe you're just horrible at one thing. Let's go to the next slide. Now, it's been interesting for me to learn how the pattern thinker works. I think in photographic pictures, but the engineer and the mathematician thinks in patterns. See, in your brain, you got circuits for what is something. I have overactive what is something circuits. Other kinds of circuits in your brain is where is something? Where are you located in space? That's the mathematician brain. Now, this praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper, extreme origami. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern. Boy, that's not my mind. Let's go to the next slide. And there are some really good origami projects some kids made. We can go on to the next slide. Now, I asked an astrophysicist, a total pattern thinker, to think about church steeples. And instead of seeing individual photorealistic pictures like what I see, he got motion of people singing and praying. I go, oh, wow, trippy. That's not my mind. Let's go to the next slide. Now there's different ways to do the math. You can do it more verbal, or you can do it more visual spatial. What's important is they know how to do the math, not how they do it. How they do it's not very important. Some of these kids are not going to be able to explain how they do it. They don't think the same way. Now, over the years, I finally just realized, relatively recently, how much the construction industry affects how I think. Construction's all about finishing projects. Well, you got a smart kid who ends up playing video games in the basement. That's not a very good finished project. If he works for NASA, that is. If he does a really good job, as a fishing guide, that's something that'd be really good. We got to think a lot more about what do they got to do when they grow up. This is why we got to start teaching working skills really young. But I want to emphasize it's never too late to start, because somebody on the spectrum always keeps developing. People are always looking for the magic turning point. It's more like a gradual emergence. I had some great teachers, Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, but I also had some cattle industry people that helped me. And sometimes they were rough with me about the thing about being a slob, but I thank them. Let's go to the next slide. There's some more evidence about the different kinds of thinking, and we can go on to the next slide. All right, different ways to look at different thinking. Some people think associational, that's me. Other people are much more linear. And when you're linear, you're really well organized. That's why on some of my books I've got co-authors, because I need them for the structure, because I get too disorganized. Pictures and patterns versus words, bottom up in bottom up. This is a field of epidemiology. So you get a case of food poisoning over here, another case of food poisoning over here. You put together the pattern, what's the common factor? That is bottom-up thinking. Now, epidemiology is science. Top-down, you make a hypothesis, and then you analyze the data. Some people are more social, some people are less social. A brain can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social-emotional. At what point is it abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. And people who think very much in words tend to overgeneralize. I find this all the time in animal behavior problems, equipment problems in the factory, and troubleshooting problems with kids. They'll say, well, what do I do about autistic behavior in the classroom? Well, I don't know what you do about it, because I don't know enough about it. If the kid's 3 and not talking, I can give you a standard answer. But once you get beyond that, there's no more standard answer. Let's go to the next slide. Look at personality traits like a music mixing board. You can be more anxious or less anxious. More mathematical, less mathematical. More visual, less visual. More social, less social. Like music mixing board. They are continuous traits. Now, one thing I've observed is us visual thinkers, we tend to be panic monsters. I've worked with a lot of designers. They're on Prozac, a really low dose of Prozac. Keeps them off the drugs and alky. It's another thing I learned while working in construction. I take antidepressants. That's why I have to drink so much water. Stop the panic attacks. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, which unfortunately they've run out of, I describe my own personal experiences with anxiety. And for the visual thinkers out there and the artists out there that are freaking out from anxiety, I'd recommend that they read that. Let's go to the next slide. What would happen to little Stevie today? A weird loner who brought snakes to school and turned them loose? How about little Albert here with no language till age 3? I won't mention the living ones. I'm only going to diagnose the dead ones. But there's a lot of people out there working for some big Silicon Valley companies, and I think they're on the spectrum. But they've grown over the years. So you can have somebody on the spectrum who's really pretty autistic-y, but as they grow and you get them out doing things, adding more and more information to their database, bottom-up thinking gets better and better and better as you fill up the database. But you've got to work on expanding the world. You've got to stretch them. Too many parents are overprotective. We've got to stretch them, get them out doing things. Let's go to the next slide. I'm seeing too many kids getting labels, and I'm worried about our educational system screening them out. Yeah, they're going to be the next Einstein, and he's playing video games in the basement? Terrible. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's look at this, Dyslexic CEOs. This is a great book by Betsy Morris. She interviewed all of these big fancy CEOs, and they were dyslexic. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, the head of JetBlue had ADHD. Super good in selling the investors. Not so good on operations. They had a mess at Kennedy Airport. Snow. And that's where you need people like me that can visualize those things. You see, you need to have both. He was marvelous at starting the company. And JetBlue's a pretty nice airline. I've been on them. Let's go to the next. How about IKEA? Dyslexic and ADHD. And I have worked in the cattle industry with people that were ADHD, dyslexic, speech impediment, took welding, started building things, owns a metal fabrication company. You know, these are things I've seen in all of the other things that I've done. Let's go to the next slide. Steve Jobs was an artist. He didn't know how to program. He was an artist. You see, when you make a product like an iPhone, the artist made the interface. The engineers had to make the innards of that phone work. See, that's the different minds working together. They complement each other. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this shows you why you need my kind of mind. And we're going to have some real disasters if we keep screening out us visual thinkers with algebra. And when I found out why the Fukushima nuclear power plant burned up, I'm going, how could you do this? Now, I can't design a nuclear reactor. I wouldn't even try. But all I need to know, and I know a lot about, just construction in general, that if you have this emergency cooling pump that's like very important, you don't want to put it in a non-waterproof basement with no watertight doors when you live next to the sea. And if I had been drawing the concrete work for this, I would have gone, wait a minute. We need watertight doors from a shipbuilding company. Simple things. That's the kind of stuff. I could have bought those. I would have got really good ones, too. This is where you need the different kinds of minds. But what I've learned is the mathematician doesn't see the water going in there. It's not stupid. It's different kinds of thinking. Then the next mistake was social. I don't know how you can do this. How can you allow a nuclear power plant to do breach of the containment vessel, spew radiation all over the place, because you didn't want to lose face? They never picked the phone up and called for help. This could have been easily stopped. It wouldn't have even been hard to stop it. But they never called for help. And they fiddled around with stupid things like metric and English pipe fittings. Oh, come on now. Seawater, oil tanker hose. Let's just put a rubber sleeve on it with some clamps. Big Gorman Rupp trash pump, and you flood the core. But I got to have the gray hairs from GE, because I don't want to cut into that thing and glow in the dark. So you get the gray hairs from 1960, because it's 60, and you have a week before it burns up. How could you do this? Yep, they didn't. The visual thinker would have prevented the accident. But somebody with autism would have picked the horn up and called. They wouldn't worry about getting fired. This is a world emergency. How could you let it happen? Let's go to the next slide. I'm very concerned today with getting kids growing up away from practical things. I think this is less of a problem up here in Alaska. But down the lower 40, we got a lot of kids that don't do any practical things. Cooking, sewing, woodworking, welding, making things. Practical things teach you that making mistakes may be okay. So you make a mistake, something doesn't work right, then you got to figure out how to fix it. We have a huge shortage in the lower 48 of skilled trades. And in farming, everybody's over 50. Now we need to have people to grow food. Let's go to the next slide. This is the stuff that saved me when I was in high school, getting bullied and teased. Hands-on activities, horses, model rockets, electronics, shared interests. And I was not teased by the kids doing those kinds of activities. Let's go to the next slide. We got to get kids into all kinds of different things where they can try on careers. Let's go to the next slide. And how did I get interested in cattle? Because at 15, I got exposed to them. I came from the Boston. But I got exposed out on my aunt's ranch. That's how I got interested. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's get a little respect for skilled trades. I'm going on a 6:30 flight tomorrow to Seattle on Alaska Airlines. And when you take the covers off the jet engine, it's very complicated. Have a little respect for it. I want it to work tomorrow. And when it looks simple with the covers on, when you take the covers off, it's really complicated. Have respect for the people in Boeing or whoever built this, and the mechanics that keep it going. Let's go to the next slide. All right, I work in ag, so I've got to talk a little bit about ag stuff. You know, a lot of young people are really concerned. They want to know where food comes from. And the one person that a lot of young consumers think is really trustworthy on telling them where food comes from are farmers and ranchers that grow food. Food companies are not considered a very reliable source. Let's go to the next slide. About 31% have never been on a farm. We're getting people further and further removed, again, from practical things. Making policy about stuff where they've never been out in the field. Let's go to the next slide. 50% of young adults in the UK cannot connect pigs with bacon. And outside of Chicago, there's a big farm called Fair Oaks Farm, a great big dairy, and it's open to the public. And they've got a pig farm that's open to the public, a great big indoor commercial pig farm. And I asked them, what's the most common sort of weird question you get? And the most common sort of weird question is, are those actually pigs? I'm going, really? You've got to be kidding? They're Disney animatronic pigs? No, they're not. They are real pigs. Let's go to the next slide. Yep, there they are. pig adventure. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, the thing that worries me is we're getting people doing more and more apps and social media. Is people getting worse on getting in their silos? I've made it a point in my talks, do autism talks. The talk I'm giving now, I've done at NASA, Corning Glassworks, JPL, Microsoft, where I talk about the different kinds of minds and how they need to work together. I actually ran into a teenage girl that didn't know what Googling was on the internet. And she thought that she could get all her news off of dating sites. And I don't know what's going on with the news. I went on CNN and Fox last night, and I got prison shows and all kinds of stuff. Couldn't find any news. I'm getting concerned that people are not reading about issues deeply. On my flight from Seattle up to here, I was the only person on the plane that had a newspaper. And they're not reading them online either. Yeah, it's games, puzzles, a lot of books. I was happy to see the books. But I'm worried about people who are not reading enough to find out what's actually going on. Let's go to the next slide. We got to take the silos down. Sometimes it's not easy, though. Special ed needs to learn more about the business world. Let's get some interesting reading matter for some of these kids to see. How about some Business Week? Really fun magazine. And since I fly a lot, I had a real chuckle over the latest cover story in Business Week, United Airlines striving to be less awful. That was the title of an article. That was really, really fun to read. Then I could read about Swamp Thing, and I could read about SpaceX. How about some science and some nature and some Wired? How about some entrepreneur magazines? Let's get some good business stuff in some of these schools. I want to lay it out on a table, get the kids to read that. There's all kinds of cool stuff out there. Let's go to the next slide. I got interested in optical illusions and psychology because I saw this in a science movie. And Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, didn't tell me how to make it. I had to figure it out for myself. And I made a lot of mistakes doing it. Let's go to the next slide. There's one of my designs in SketchUp. SketchUp's free software. There's all kinds of free things online. Like for little kids in programming, there's Scratch programming. There's Khan Academy, think Genghis Khan. K-H-A-N, Khan Academy. They want to know how Minecraft works. They need to learn some JavaScript. Let's learn some programming. Let's learn some job skills. Let's go to the next slide. And how about kids doing things with 3D printers? Now the thing is, I think it's interesting that MakerBot says you got to have patience to do this because electronics meets mechanical glue gun thingy. And it's not electronic. It's real. And if you get mad at it, it's sure not going to work. Let's go on to the next slide. And there are some of my books. Autistic Brain, I've got all the validation for the different kinds of minds. Animal books and Animals in Translation, I talk about how animals are sensory-based thinkers. Now, what we're going to do right now is get some questions, because this is the part I like the best. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody. Somebody better get their hand up. Okay, right here. Oh, that's a photographer. Okay, someone. Come on, I'm going to pick somebody. Come on, what's wrong with you? Right there? Okay, right there. Okay.
Could you talk a little bit about the problems you ran into when trying to learn computer programming?
When I try to do programming, it's too abstract. I couldn't make pictures. Now, I've been reading about this Scratch programming that they use for teaching little kids. Now, I was trying to do Fortran. You remember, this is a long time ago. 68. Trying to do Fortran. It was too abstract. It was too much like algebra. But I'm really good at doing the industrial design part. So why don't we let you be good at the programming? But maybe I better design the safety systems for certain things. Because I can visualize how mechanical things can break.
It's a lot different today. It's very visual.
Well, maybe I could do it better today. But when I tried to do it with Fortran, it was an absolute disaster. Yeah, maybe I could do it better today. You know, and things have changed. This brings up the important things. If we're working with kids, expose them to different things. They won't know until they try it. Okay?
What would you say was someone who fell into experiential thinking?
Experiential thinking? Okay, first of all, you got to tell me what experiential thinking is. That's a little abstract for me. What do you mean by that?
Well, when someone has to, when they learn things, it's better for them to experience themselves.
In other words, some people learn better by doing. And some people are more, going to learn, like on the mathematics, the visual thinkers tend to be bad at algebra, good at geometry. But then there's another kind of person who's really good at algebra and they hate geometry. See, that's an example of different kinds of minds. It's sort of like, okay, maybe I could learn how to, do certain kinds of programming, but I might not be that good at it. I'm going to be a lot better at doing the visual thinking stuff. And to make good products, you need to have both. Okay, let's think about something like self-driving cars. To me, there are certain life-critical functions that should be non-electronic. and that means basically, I've got to be able to steer it off the road, turn it off, and stop it. That should be non-electronic. Okay.
I guess, what are your thoughts on organizations that are working towards finding a
Cure for autism? What do I think of a cure for autism? If you got rid of all of the autism genetics, there's a lot of artists, musicians, programmers, and scientists you'd get rid of. You see, a little bit of the trait gives advantage, and there are papers in the literature on creativity, on certain types of thinking, but severe autism is certainly not a good thing. If you look at the genetics, it's a complicated genetics. You know how in the DNA you've got the rungs of the ladder, and you do little nucleotide reversals, they're called SNPs, and you get all these SNPs variations that are involved with brain development. And so if you totally got rid of it, we'd have social yakety-yaks, and we'd probably have a very boring world. You see a little bit of it. Let's take depression. There's some depression going with creative writing. When does being sad turn into depression? When does moody turn into bipolar? See, again, there's no black and white dividing line. Now, schizophrenia might be the price we pay for language. And that's totally bad when it happens. There may be a way to prevent schizophrenia. It is actually excessive synaptic pruning. See, as the brain develops, it makes too many connections. And then the system has to prune back the unruly bushes. And that happens in adolescence, and if too many bushes get pruned back, you've got problems. Okay, right here.
Can you describe a little bit of what it was like before you were verbal? When people spoke to you, did you process what they were saying?
Okay, what was it? The question was, what was it like before I was verbal? If the grown-ups talked fast, it went into gibberish. You got to slow down. When they talk slowly, I could understand. Now, some individuals that never learn to talk, I think it remains gibberish. They're just hearing the hard consonant sounds. There's basically three ways that the language in the brain can be messed up. I had trouble with getting it out. So expressive, couldn't get it out. Speak what you say wasn't working right. And if they talk fast, it went into gibberish. That's auditory processing problems. Then you get the echolalic kid. Smooth, clear language comes out, learning movie scripts. And you might wonder, why movie scripts? Because it always says it the same way. And then a child might try to use a movie script as language, but he doesn't know what the words mean. So you can have variations. So that if he tries to take a line out of a movie and use it as real language, don't try to stop that. That's the first link that he's beginning to understand that language isn't just noise. Okay, right here. Why did I make the squeezing machine? Well, the reason I made the squeezing machine was when I got into puberty, panic attacks started. A lot of visual thinkers got a lot of panic attacks. I noticed that when they put cattle in a squeeze chute to hold them for vaccinations, that some of them relaxed. So then I built a thing that applied pressure. Some individuals find pressure very, very calming. Others don't. This is all these sensory problems. They're very variable. Okay, right here.
Is there a different kind of autistic?
Different kind of what? Different kinds of autistic people? Well, this is the problem. You've got a very big spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you've got a Silicon Valley engineer running a major tech company. The labels got avoided because they went to a Montessori school. And then you've got another situation where maybe took welding class and is doing well doing that. You got another situation they're totally frustrated with school and get addicted to video games. You see, when you work with the little kids, one of the reasons why the label the same is when the little kids look really bad at age 3, and I looked horrible at age 3, totally horrible, totally low functioning. And you work really hard on little kids. You kind of pull them out of it. There's ones that get normal speech, go on to real high-level jobs. Then there's kind of a middle group where they got some speech. And then you've got a very severe group that may have epilepsy on top of the autism really bad. And they're very, very different. That's the problem. Okay, right here. How's the average neurotypical person think? Very illogically, if you look at our election stuff that's going on. And some of the stuff that helped me the most, that gave me insight, was reading other first-person accounts. Where a diagnosis actually can give the most insight is with an older person having problems with relationships and dating. And I have a book called Different, Not Less. Different, Not Less. It's about 14 older people in good jobs that got diagnosed later in life because their relationships were a mess. And that's where a diagnosis was helpful. But I've been seeing in too many of these smart kind of Asperger kids, I'm seeing too much helicopter parents and not getting them out doing enough stuff. But it's never too late to start. Let's say he's 22 and he's never had a job. Let's get him a job somewhere. And let's avoid the interview process. Let's short circuit that. Use your networks. You find a manager at a store or something that's willing to work with them, and show them how to interact with customers. And you got to get out there and learn it. Okay?
How did you survive off of Jell-O and pudding when you were younger?
Okay, why was I eating Jell-O and pudding? That was for short periods of time when I had colitis. All the panic attacks in my 20s, as I got worse and worse and worse, I had terrible colitis attacks. So I'd eat yogurt and Jell-O for a week because everything else went through me, and I gradually weaned myself off. And when I went on the antidepressants, it cured the colitis. That was caused by my nervous system just being in a constant state of stress all the time. Okay, right here.
How would you suggest a person with autism deal with
Traumatic events? Okay, that's sort of too generalized. First of all, you've got to look at how he reacted to the traumatic event. I don't know what the traumatic event is. Is it physical trauma? Loss of a parent? That can be really traumatic. Physical trauma? Well, one of the things that's likely to do is cause extreme fear. And he's going to want to absolutely stay away from wherever the physical trauma is taking place. If somebody's beating him up, he needs to be just gotten away from that. For me, brain scans showed my fear center was larger than normal. Now, others that may not be true, but if you beat up an animal in a certain place, they're going to get afraid of that place. They're not going to want to go there.
How did you stop fighting?
How do I spell what?
How did you stop fighting?
Stop fighting?
Start writing.
How do I start writing? Well, you have to start doing it. And one of the things that helped me when I was in elementary school and I did writing, the teacher would red mark it up and copy it. And I know sometimes they don't like to do that because it's markup, bad for the kid's self-esteem. I say, BS. I would not have learned how to write if teachers hadn't copy edited my work. I talked to a teacher down in Texas. He says, yeah, I still copy edit work. We just use a green pen now. But that's how you learn how to write, is when I did one of my first books, Thinking in Pictures, man, Betsy, she scribbled all over it. It's called copy editing. And there's a lot of people on the spectrum that ramble, and they need a good editor to get rid of the rambling, help them to organize the work.
Because I like writing and I'm trying to get better at it.
But you got to get good at it, and take a writing class. And if you can take a writing class where a teacher marks up your work, good, because that's how you're going to learn. And I learned so much from Betsy when she marked up my work. Okay, right here.
Could you speak a little bit more about video games and maybe I'm getting the impression of the pernicious effect of them? And
Well, there's some real problems with video game addictions. When I was a little kid, they had cartoons on the TV. I loved watching that. Watching was limited. But there's certain kind of autistic kid that gets really addicted to video games. And the best thing to do is limit it. They're not going on and learning programming. First of all, someone's got to expose them to programming for them to learn the programming. But there's some real problems with, I'm hearing too often, he's 21, I can't get him out of the basement. And this is the reason why with Deborah Moore did the book, The Loving Push. Run out of that, but you can order it. And got a lot of scientific studies in that article on problems with video game addictions. If you've got a kid that's doing that, you've got to wean them off. But you've got to replace it with something else. Like maybe doing artwork, doing auto mechanics. And there's other kids that, take it or leave video games. But we need to be limiting the screen time. I was limited to an hour of TV a day. And it might sound harsh about this, but I'm not seeing good outcomes. I'm seeing too many ending up on Social Security playing video games. I've had moms come to me and say, he's 18, I can't get him out of the basement. One of the things I want to do is get him a job. And I've got to replace the video game playing with something else. You can't just have nothing to do. So he's got to start doing something else and then gradually wean off the video games. Okay, right here.
as you were growing up and learning about yourself, how important did role models play? How important were role models that you may have had, or did you just go out and figure it out on your own?
Well, there were good role models that were really important. My science teacher was an excellent role model. There were people in the cattle industry that were bad to me, and that was mainly the cowboy foremans. It was not the feed yard owners. They actually were good to me and tried to help me because they recognized my ability. And I know there's a lot of boys out there that I think that need good male role models, getting them out doing things.
So it was the people you were working for were...
That's right. There was a very good contractor named Jim Uhl who actually seeked me out to design jobs for him so that he could build them. And he really helped me out a whole lot. There were some decent people out there.
But as you were growing up and really young and learning that you were autistic and whatnot...
Well, when I was really young, I didn't sort of realize how different I was until I got into high school. High school was horrible. But the biggest problem I'm seeing is kids not learning working skills, graduating from college, and they've never had a job. By the time I graduated from college, I'd done a ton of internships. Worked at a research lab, had to rent a house with another lady. My mother and a teacher at the college set it up, just, networking. My aunt's ranch, I had to wait on tables there. They had guests. There were some things they had to do there that was just work, too. But that taught valuable working skills. But I'm seeing problems where some families can't let go. I ran into a family where they had a kid in his mid-teens sitting at home in his room. This was the beginning of the summers, and animating video. And I got to talking to him, and I found out his church wanted the church picnic edited. And I suggested that her son edit this video for their church. And I said, but he needs to do it in the church office. I want his butt out of the house, a mile down the road in the church office. And Mom started breaking down and crying, saying she couldn't let go. When I was this kid's age, I was on an airplane flying from New York to Arizona. And she was upset about going to a church office a mile down the road. They're best friends with the pastor. No, you've got to get them out of the house. Okay, I'm going to take this person right there.
You talk about negative things about the video games. Is there anything positive about video games and autism?
Anything positive about video games? Yeah, become a game designer and get a good job at one. That'd be positive. Oh, how much video game playing are you doing? I've never suggested banning it. I'm talking about limiting it. And because we got to get the job done, and I want to see you get into a good career. Now, I'll tell you, the video game industry, and I follow all the business stuff. I buy all the business magazines and I read them on the plane. Because I think business magazines are really fun. I really like business magazines. And the problem with the video game industry, there's 10 applicants for every job slot. Maybe 15 applicants for every job slot. Business computing, it's a lot easier to get into. You've either got to be a super top-notch programmer or super top-notch artist. Because there's two sides to video games. There's the art side. Now, there's some kids I've seen artwork good enough for the video game trade. But not all that often. And programming, I couldn't judge that. Now, if you want to get into that field, make an app and put it up online. I saw a Galaxy phone just the other day where a kid had changed the whole interface. He made a whole new interface for Galaxy phone. Well, that's the sort of stuff, you put that up online, employers are going to get interested in that. Yeah, if you learn how to make video games, yeah, you can make a career out of that. How much video game playing are you doing? Fess up now. How many hours a day are you playing video games?
I'm limited to a
Couple
couple hours a day.
of hours a day is maximum.
And if I deal with other people, and then I can get more.
Well, what year school are you now?
I graduated.
You graduated my school?
No, I graduated a while ago.
All right, what are you doing? You got a job?
Not yet, but
You need to get one. Okay. All right. Now, let's do some networking. Okay, what do you think you might be good at doing? Art, programming, writing, retail store?
Well, I think I'm going down to California, but I'll have to do a lot more up here.
I think maybe you need a job in a retail store. And we need to find a manager that will work with you. Don't stalk customers around the store. You need to get a job and you need to learn how to keep it. That's what you need to do. What is your job? Okay, she's cleaning houses. Okay, but maybe why don't you get some retail job? A nice quiet shoe store or something like that, and you get really knowledgeable about all the merchandise. No, you can get a job in a retail store. If you go to a church, how about a church usher job? Give you better social skills. You got to get out and do stuff. We don't want to think about it. We got to do it. And you just need to grease the skids. Go find somebody who's a manager of some store around here and just set it up and make it work. Find somebody willing to coach you, because they got to coach you on how to work with customers in that store, like being in a foreign country. Learning social skills is like being in a foreign country. When I went to China, I learned this is rude pointing. You point like this. I also learned in China that when you get off airplanes, that it's okay to climb over the top of other passengers. I'm not going to do that here. They were doing that in China, pushing and shoving on an airplane. I couldn't believe it. Okay, right there. Yep, I've been to other countries and I've looked at cattle equipment. Argentina, South America, Europe, a lot of different countries.
Are there cultural differences in the way the people treat the cattle in other countries?
Well, some cattle in some countries, they're very tame cattle, and they don't use any equipment to handle them because they're tame, and they lead them around. There's a lot, and then some places people treat animals badly. I mean, there's a lot of variation. How come you're interested in that?
I don't know, just different cultures like Japan, they're called beef, and feed
Yeah, I went to a feedlot in Japan, and they had them indoors in a building. I know they weren't fed any beer, but they looked like they were pretty well treated. Okay, right here with the red hat.
Can you explain what a child is experiencing when they have sensory overload and they go into either the flight?
All right, sensory overload. Imagine I put my head inside that thing and they start pounding on that drum. That's what sensory overload is.
What about the flight part?
Well, some people, it can be lights. It's like your senses only have one volume control turned on super high. You can't modulate. If you're working with somebody that remains nonverbal, there's still a few copies left out there, Carly's Voice, and she describes where it took huge amounts of concentration to screen out background noise. You might want to pick that book up. There's also another one called How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? You'll have to order online. It's a young Indian guy, Indian like from the country India, who looks very, very low functioning, and he lives in a very sensory disordered world. But it's, just imagine getting the loudest thing, stuff that most people would consider very loud, like maybe just a somewhat noisy Walmart or something, is like sticking your head in the middle of the rock and roll speaker. I hope that explains it, okay?
Are you religious?
Well, I've got this Hubble Space Telescope poster on my wall. It shows many, many galaxies out there, and I look at it a lot. Okay. Okay? When I was growing up, okay, what did Mom do to bolster my self-esteem? Well, I only got praised when I did something really exceptional. Table manners were expected, being on time was expected, cleaning up your room was expected, but when I made a really, truly beautiful clay horse, they made a big deal out of that. Or a very, very nice painting. It wasn't like getting rewarded for every little thing. I got rewarded just for really important things. A real accomplishment makes self-esteem. When I did some of my projects that were shown in the movie, that sense of accomplishment, I figured out myself how to do it. Had to make a lot of mistakes, too. Okay, right here.
The disorders here in town, and I don't know much about autism, but you had mentioned that there were some key people in your life that helped you kind of, I guess, assimilate.
Okay, well,
What resources would you advise for business?
well, you've got an autism society here in town. I advise joining that. That'd be the first thing. Good teachers. I had a very good speech teacher. I had a nanny when I was 3 who played constant turn-taking games with me. My mother was always stretching me and pushing me. She had really good sense how to stretch and push me. I had some very good teachers in elementary school, great science teacher in high school, and there were also people in the cattle industry that recognized some of my abilities. There's no single thing. And you see, the problem when the kids get a little older is autism is so variable. When the kids are little and they're not talking, the treatment's I can give you a standard answer for that. Got to start working on the kid. But when they get older, see, some of the social circuits aren't hooked up. So they have to learn social skills, like being in a foreign country. And I think today, a lot of the kids that are kind of geeky and nerdy are having more troubles because they don't teach social skills in the rigid, structured way they were taught in my generation. Okay, let's take 2 more questions. Teasing in school, how did I deal with that? Only places I was not teased was the specialized interests. Things like horseback riding, model rockets, electronics. There are some kids that get so bullied in high school they need to be taken out. There's some kids who need to go from childhood to adulthood. But if you homeschool, fully verbal high school kid, get a job. I've got to get them out of the house. And they can do some of the classes online, because they've got to learn those working skills. This is the thing, it's one of the biggest problems, because you might have a guy who's really good at art, And then he doesn't want to do his employer's assignments because he thinks they're stupid. Well, it is work. And I'll tell you what my nephew went to college for 4 years in industrial design, and he got hired by this company called Modco. And his very first project, and he didn't pick it out, was a dog poop computer bag. And it's now the Modco Shake Potty. My nephew designed the Modco Shake Potty. It is called work. I don't think he would have picked that project out. It's Modco. You can look it up. Modko. Spelled kind of weird. Shake Potty. And he made it. He made it very nice. It looks like a very nice little metal aluminum computer bag. A little Fifi on the 20th floor of some New York apartment to do her business in. It is called work. And you have to do the project the employer wants you to do. All right, one more right there.
Do you like hands-on work?
Do I like what?
Hands-on work?
Hands-on work? Oh, yeah, I loved building things. When I was a little kid, if you could make it out of paper and cardboard, I made it. And I experimented for hours and hours and hours flying little bird kites behind my trike, doing all kinds of little aviation experiments. I just loved that stuff. And I think a lot of kids today aren't doing enough hands-on things. Well, I think I'm going to end it right here, and thank everybody for coming.
So on behalf of the Autism Society of Alaska, we want to present Dr. Temple Grandin a gift from the Alaska Bowl Company as a thank you for coming to Alaska and enriching all of Alaska. I also want to thank everyone that is here right now, and I want to touch on a question that was asked by Brian up here, because as a community, it is our goal as the Autism Society to come together and learn more. And you talk a lot about get a job. You got to get a job. I think we've heard a lot of that tonight. And what Brian was asking from the other perspective, owning a business, how can this community come together and have people work for them? What is your one thing that you can tell them to do?
Well, one of the things, if you hire somebody that's got some social circuits missing, when they make a mistake at work, you cannot be vague. When I called the welding pigeon doo-doo, Harley pulled me into his office, and he very carefully explained that that was not acceptable talk. You cannot hint and say things like you're not a team player. You've got to explain exactly what they did wrong. And you've got to find a boss willing to work with them. Because when I was working at the Farmer Ranchman, my first boss really liked me, recognized my work. We got a new boss, and he hadn't really seen my work. And he didn't like me. He was going to get rid of me because I was too weird. But Susan, the nice lady in the graphic department, says, you know, Jim doesn't like you. We're going to have to get a portfolio together of all my work. So I put all my articles in a scrapbook and showed it to Jim, and he gave me a raise. But we need to find bosses willing to work with the kid and develop the kid and just teach him. Okay, let's say we're doing retail. Okay, you approach a customer twice. You don't stalk them around the store. And you might say, now watch Susie, how she works with customers. Now then imitate the way she approaches a customer to try to sell something. And you just have to be taught how to do it, like coaching them in a play. And you get the right boss that can work with them. They're going to take longer to train. It's going to take longer to train. But when they get trained, they can be really, really good.
Thank you. One thing that I want to say as the Executive Director of the Autism Society, thank you to all of you who are here today, and thank you to people who are wanting to take the extra time. Like Temple's saying that, it takes a little bit extra time, and we at the Autism Society are here to help you understand what that might be. So please reach out to us. If you are a business owner or you know a place, maybe it's even, like Temple said, neighborhood jobs, shoveling snow, or if you have dogs that need to be picked up after.
Well, the other thing is you've got different levels. I mean, you've got, let's say, it's a real high-level job like programming. See, now in that situation, it's really important to not give vague assignments. Like when I did doing all those designing projects for big meat companies, I would just sit there and say, okay, the budget, here are the boundaries, don't touch the railroad tracks, there'd be boundaries for lay out things, what the job had to do. And even now, I worked on a team effort with some colleagues on writing some animal welfare guidelines. And I just basically said, well, give me homework. I'll write this section, it's this long, this format, get it in on this date. Where it's clear. Or if it's a programming job, say I want a phone app that's going to do this specific task, uses this much memory, where there's a specific outcome for the project and a deadline for doing a project. You wouldn't tell them how to do the programming, but you'd say it has to be in this language, though, that would be required. And it has to do some specific thing. Where you give it, I don't let clients do the designing part, but I've got to know from the client that they want me to take one man off the cattle handling crew. That's one of the ways I used to sell projects, was on labor reduction.
So if you could reach out to us at the Autism Society, we would like to know if your business is interested in working with people. That way when people ask us, hey, I have a 17-year-old, we want to get them a job. A 14-year-old,
you get a 17-year-old that's really verbal. I actually want them to learn how to interact with customers. Then you get people that are more severely impaired, where pushing carts or shelving products or something like that is probably the highest level job they can do. See, one of the problems I see is a lot of people don't differentiate between somebody that ought to be doing something very high level, somebody where maybe a janitor job is appropriate, and they're working at their full ability.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know that there's a few books left out for sale, so if you didn't get one or you only got one, you're now able to buy two if that's something you want. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dr. Temple, for being here.